Britain is currently grappling with what can only be described as the deepest, most ferocious national crisis in recent memory, a crisis so vast and all-encompassing that entire cities have within hours transformed into zones of near-total devastation, where streets once familiar and ordinary have been overtaken by fire, smoke, and human fury, and where government institutions, police forces, emergency responders, and political leadership alike are operating under unprecedented pressure, stress, and scrutiny. Pressures so intense that financial experts have openly admitted even the catastrophic 2008 economic crash cannot fully explain the magnitude of this social and political collapse. Pressures that now manifest in every corner of society, from the emergency rooms in Belfast to the administrative halls of Westminster, from the crowded neighborhoods of Derry to the business districts of Newcastle. Pressures that reveal a population stretched to breaking point and a state seemingly incapable of keeping pace with the scale of the disaster it faces. It all began on the evening of November 5, 2025, precisely at 8:42 p.m., in the central district of Belfast, when the first massive, bone-rattling explosion was heard, a blast so loud and sudden that it seemed to shatter not only windows and glass but the very sense of stability that residents had long taken for granted. A blast followed within moments by the wail of sirens, by the distant but growing hum of chants, shouts, and screams, by the unmistakable sounds of a city in chaos. Sounds that immediately signaled to onlookers and residents alike that this was not simply a protest, not simply a march or a demonstration, but the unmistakable onset of a full civil breakdown. A breakdown so profound that it was being enacted simultaneously across multiple social, political, and economic layers of society, and that this time, the participants in the unrest were not limited to masked youths or fringe elements, but encompassed people of every age, from teenagers to the elderly, people from all backgrounds, all neighborhoods, all economic levels, and all degrees of frustration, individuals who had endured years of skyrocketing inflation, who had been crushed by rental crises, who had witnessed the collapse of public services, who had experienced the exhaustion and understaffing of the National Health Service, and who were outraged at what they perceived as the government's unchecked spending on migrant hotel contracts, which many believed represented a blatant misallocation of public funds while essential services languished in neglect. The most symbolic, most defining, most nationally resonant moment of that night occurred when thousands of individuals simultaneously took to the streets to set fire to the Union Jack, Britain's national flag, an act of protest so visually and politically powerful that it instantly became a global news image, a visceral declaration that the people had lost all faith in governance, in institutions, in elected representatives, a fracture in the social contract so severe that it seemed to challenge not merely the authority of the state but the very integrity of the nation itself, signaling that citizens were no longer merely expressing dissatisfaction, they were actively confronting the state, forcing the country to recognize that its people had reached a breaking point. Across Northern Ireland, the unrest was meticulously coordinated, with a total of 37 migrant hotels subjected to simultaneous fire attacks, a calculated act of rebellion designed to send a message about public anger at perceived inequities and mismanagement. And the images of these buildings engulfed in flame, smoke rising into the night sky, metal beams warped by heat, windows shattered, interiors reduced to rubble, created a haunting visual across every media outlet, with emergency responders stretched to the limit, forced to respond to 92 active fire calls in a single night, a record-breaking strain that no modern emergency service had previously encountered. In total, over 100,000 people took to the streets in cities including Belfast, Derry, Antrim, Newcastle, and London, creating a scene of mass unrest where chants, firebombs, broken glass, and riot shields intersected in a tableau of chaos, a spectacle that combined both anger and despair, both violence and desperation, and that left the population watching, horrified yet unable to look away. Despite the intensity of the unrest, Westminster offered no immediate, effective response, a vacuum of leadership that only intensified public anger, as citizens began to realize that those entrusted with governance were entirely disconnected from the realities unfolding on the streets, incapable of translating rhetoric into action, unwilling to confront the depth of the crisis, and content instead to rely on scripted statements, bureaucratic terminology, and procedural delays, while the country literally burned. The migrant hotels that became the focal points of the attacks had long been a flashpoint of controversy, with government documents revealing taxpayer money had been spent in ways that were increasingly viewed as uncontrolled, excessive, and mismanaged. For example, The King's Crown Hotel in Lisburn alone had an annual contract that reached £7.88 million. And by the time the building succumbed to the flames, it had become a twisted pile of ash and melted steel, a vivid symbol of the anger and frustration simmering across the nation. Videos of the King's Crown Hotel ablaze spread rapidly across social media, capturing not only the flames but the human element, the crowds chanting, the emergency responders struggling to contain the inferno, and one firefighter's statement, "We're not fighting fire anymore. We're fighting a collapsing country," became a repeated tagline across news tickers worldwide, an acknowledgement that this crisis had transcended property destruction and had entered the realm of systemic national failure. Outside the High Street Hotel in Belfast, police officers formed a protective line in front of a building that housed 230 asylum seekers, a fragile human shield against the chaotic masses. Yet when flames began to spread from the rear of the structure, emergency evacuations became fraught with tension, the crowd pressing against law enforcement, creating a scene of panic and disorder, illustrating both the power and the limits of authority in a state under siege. In just a 24-hour period, 19 targeted arson attacks were reported, including in Derry, Lisburn and Ballymena, affecting not only migrant facilities but also public offices, commercial establishments, and private properties, creating a sense that the social fabric itself was under attack, unraveling under the combined forces of economic, political, and emotional stress. Within this chaos emerged viral, emotionally charged moments that captured the public imagination, such as 27-year-old nurse Sophie whose rent had increased by 41% that year, streaming live through her rain-soaked smartphone as flames reflected behind her, saying, "Our NHS departments aren't funded, we can't provide beds for patients, we work overtime after overtime, yet the government has millions to spend on migrant hotels," her words striking a chord with viewers across the country, garnering over 3.2 million views and creating comment threads overflowing with nationwide frustration, empathy, and anger. Similarly, retired war veteran Thomas Reed, appearing on camera with the Union Jack draped over his shoulders, tearful yet resolute, said, "I fought for a country that doesn't exist anymore," a statement that became a metaphor for Britain's fractured identity and the sense of betrayal felt by citizens who had once believed in national unity and shared purpose. Leaked Home Office documents confirmed that Northern Command was over, reserve units had been requested, and emergency protocols were active, yet political authorization for decisive action had not materialized, leaving ground forces increasingly frustrated, vulnerable, and ineffective. A gap between authority and implementation that amplified the sense of helplessness across the nation. By 10:27 p.m., London experienced a surge of protesters moving toward Parliament grounds, where barricades collapsed, metal fencing fell like dominoes, and police were forced to deploy tear gas for the first time since the 2013 riots, as reporters on the ground described the cacophony of batons, shields, boots, and bodies colliding as a metallic heartbeat echoing the panic and fear gripping the capital. Downing Street, in response, issued a brief statement at 10:45 p.m., condemning the violence but failing to acknowledge the migrant hotel contracts, the public outrage, or the collapse of essential services, a hollow pronouncement that only deepened the public's sense of abandonment. MI5 confirmed that 52 encrypted channels were actively coordinating crowd movements in real time, while police drones were twice forced down by jamming signals, and cellular towers in Coleraine were destroyed, yet reinforcements were slow or non-existent. As midnight arrived, the Cabinet Office leaked a second memo stating, "Containment impossible, public mood volatile, systemic collapse, risk increasing," words usually reserved for wartime crisis reports, underscoring the scale of failure and the government's underestimation of the unfolding disaster. Fuel depots faced blockades by civilian vehicles, causing a 19% overnight reduction in Northern Ireland's fuel supply, forcing hospitals to rely on backup generators, stretching the NHS to its limit, and demonstrating the immediate, tangible impact of civil unrest on public infrastructure. By the morning of November 6, the hashtag Britain on Fire had surpassed 64 million impressions, outpacing the 2024 general election and Queen Elizabeth II's funeral, dominated by visuals of exhausted police officers kneeling, weeping, or aiding civilians, reflecting the deep emotional fracture within both society and its enforcers. Markets reacted instantly, with £1.2 billion wiped from retail indexes, consumer confidence dropping 8% overnight, and Belfast to Dublin flights surging 46%, a signal that citizens were attempting to flee the unrest temporarily, seeking safety and respite from chaos. At 11:55 a.m., Prime Minister Keir Starmer delivered a national stability address, reading from a single page, ignoring migrant hotel controversies, public fury, NHS crises, or street-level collapse, prompting reporters to shout questions that went unanswered, further fueling anger and distrust. By this time, 142 individuals had been injured, 27 police officers hospitalized, and total property damage had exceeded £91 million, with international media dubbing the event the Starmer collapse, a phrase capturing the symbolic and political implications of leadership failure. Yet amidst the destruction, humanity persisted. Citizens distributed blankets and water under burning buildings. A young migrant girl helped an elderly Irish shopkeeper. Volunteers at Donegal Square lit candles in a small church, creating a flickering light of unity and compassion. Teacher Eileen wrote on the scorched wall of the destroyed King's Crown Hotel, "Forgiveness builds what fury burns," a line that went viral, offering an emotional pause and a reminder that even in the darkest hours, humanity and resilience endure. Britain has historically rebuilt itself after its greatest tragedies, from the Blitz to economic collapses and political upheavals, and there is hope that these flames may now serve as an awakening, a moment of reflection on the direction of the nation, the priorities of governance, and whether policies, institutions, and leadership truly address the people's needs. The most profound question now echoing across screens, cities, and hearts is whether these riots are merely destruction, or whether they represent a national reckoning, a moment where citizens assert their rights, dignity, and identity. And perhaps, the greatest question is not simply whether the country is burning, but what kind of leadership, foresight, and unity are required to save it. As people ask themselves, are we the fire destroying the nation, or the hands passing blankets through broken windows? A question that hangs in the air like smoke, demanding an answer from a society on the brink, a country at a crossroads, and a population determined to reclaim its voice, its agency, and its future.